We've got another wonderful speaker who's going to talk to the topic of commercial finance, the changing landscape. I do have to prep you, this is quite legislative, so quite dry, but very important as well. So he's the Director of Quantum Business Finance, which arranges equipment finance covering lease, hire purchase and chattel mortgage, with an explicit focus on long-term personal relationship with each customer as they deal with over 25 commercial lenders. He's a board patron and past president of Commercial and Asset Finance Brokers Association of Australia, or CAFBA, which is the peak national body of both commercial and equipment finance brokers in Australia. In addition, he's an advisor and former deputy chair of the Council of Small Business Australia, or CAFBA, which is the country's peak body exclusively representing the interests of small, medium enterprise businesses, and boasts a proud history of strong advocacy on small business issues ranging from taxation and workplace relations through to competition, law and retail tenancy. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Mr. David Gandolfo.
Thank you very much for that. I was just marvelling at how much I don't look like that photo. So I'm going to talk about a few different things, and yeah, we'll be a little bit legislative, but I'm not very complicated, and I'll try to make it not terribly complicated. Commercial and Asset Finance Brokers Association, the changing landscape and the things that are sort of changing in the commercial finance market. I should just start off by just saying, who are we? As a Commercial and Asset Finance Brokers Association, we represent commercial finance brokers, asset finance brokers, and that includes trade, debtor finance, anybody who's basically in the commercial space. We are committed to professional standards. I'm not going to read what's on the screen there, but I'll describe through a series of these slides and some commentary around that, the sorts of things that we do and how we go about it. And certainly, if you are in the commercial space, as I'm sure many of you are, this is relevant to you, and I would encourage, rather than you listen to all the things that I say, I'm more interested in the questions that you have. And so, at the end of this, if there's time, I'd like you just to throw some questions, please. I'll run through the CAFBA is made up, or the board of directors of CAFBA is made up of brokers. So, with the exception of our fantastic CEO, David Gill, who's sitting down here, the board is made up of brokers who run large, successful broking firms, commercial broking firms from around the country, and they're represented Melbourne, Sydney, Adelaide, Perth, North Queensland. There's we represent different. We don't have state chapters. We have one committee or one board that represents the whole of the country. Terry Moody and I. Terry's sitting down here, my good friend and colleague Terry Moody. Terry and I are not on the board, but as was mentioned in the intro, I'm a past president of CAFBA, as is Terry Moody. I'm currently the chair of Advocacy, and Terry chairs the Education Foundation, and I'll talk about that. And Terry and I are both board patrons of CAFBA. So we have a continuing role without actually being on the board. In fact, we vacated the board to make way for two board vacancies, so we could have a couple of new and younger board members, because we encourage diversity. I'm going to talk about a few different things. Well, every few years we have, every 4 or 5 years, we have a very comprehensive strategic review, and we set out what our goals will be for the next 4 to 5 years. That's run externally. It's run at fairly substantial cost, and a lot of external stakeholders are interviewed about their interactions with CAFBA, what we provide to them, what their impressions of us are, and what they think we ought to be doing. We take a lot of information from that, and we set out what our goals will be. The external party who runs that process reports back to us, obviously, on how we're going with that, and we interact with them on what's been achieved. But what they tell us is that very few professional bodies or industry bodies actually do all of the things that they set out to do in a 5-year strategic plan. We always do them. So I can say with some confidence that the things that I'm going to present are in the process of happening and will be seen to fruition. Self-regulation. This has been, since I got involved with CAFBA, and I actually, a little brief history of CAFBA. We formed in 2008 after Terry, who was the president of the New South Wales Asset Finance Brokers Association, and I was in charge of the Victorian one. merged, and we merged with on the basis of forming a national body because there was national consumer credit regulation which was going to come and affect us, and we couldn't go to Canberra as state bodies, and that effectively was what that first phone call was about all those years ago. So and one of the pillars of that is to be able to continue to self-regulate so that we don't come under the credit licence regime and we're not regulated by ASIC as resi home loan brokers would be. That's important to us, and I'll expand on that. Education. There's not much that can't be solved with education better than with regulation. And education is an extremely important part, not just of what we provide to our membership, but that our membership maintains a minimum education standard so that when we do go to the regulators, like ASIC, and say, we self-regulate, but we exceed the ASIC standard for those who are regulated. And part of that is the probity piece and the education piece. Advocacy, we do a lot with Canberra, and I know that the other two professional bodies in the resi space do that as well, because we run into them a lot and we have a good collaborative working relationship with the MFAA, in fact a very good relationship. But we advocate not just for our members but for our customers, or the customers of our members. And if we get a regulatory a win, and there's been some substantial wins which I'll expand on, then it's not just our members and our brokers who get the benefit of that. It's literally millions of business owners who get the benefit of that. And I can call back to the 2013 decision by the then Labor government not to extend consumer credit regulation into the commercial space. And I can tell you that there were, and you know what the application process is for consumers. If that was ever applied to commercial business, it would have been disastrous. And there were literally millions of businesses around the country who benefited that day when that was announced. And then member value. I mean, we ask people to be members of our organisation, and we want there to be a benefit in that. So, and hopefully, over the course of the next few minutes, I can explain or provide some value about what that is, and there will be a rush of people out here to go and sign up with Eddie Wellens, who's out there, happy to take your membership application if you're not already a member. Who do we speak to? Well, we speak very closely to both sides of politics, and it's important, doesn't matter who's in government, to continue a dialogue at senior levels with both sides of politics. I mentioned the 2013 example. Back when that was the case, Bill Shorten was the minister. David and Terry and I were in the meeting with Bill and Chris Bowen, I think earlier that night, when he announced that he wasn't going to extend NCCP, and he gave us the credit for that. But a lot of the work that was done was actually done with the Libs, with the Senate, because Senate estimates can raise issues, or Senate opposition senators can raise issues to the government, and that was actually our conduit, our method to actually apply some pressure to the government. Since then, of course, we've been working very, very closely with Labor over the last 2 terms of government, and we had a lot to say about the tax policies that they went to the election with one election ago, and we support policies, not parties. And if we think that policies aren't good, like franking credits policies or capital gains policies, we will say so vocally. And if we think a policy like the investment guarantee scheme is good, we will say that too. But we don't back parties, simply policies. And we are, if we have one guiding light, it is ultimately what's good for the people that we serve. And whatever the best outcome is for them, that's what we advocate. We also, I should mention, we talked to the crossbench as well 2 nights ago. I had dinner with Zoe Daniels, who's one of the Teal independents, who lives in Melbourne, not far from where I do. And we won't be engaging heavily with each of the Teals or with the Greens, but we certainly maintain a dialogue with the crossbench, particularly in the Senate, where a lot of decisions ultimately are made. We also liaise with all of the regulators, and actually quite regularly. Mark Boris said earlier that we don't all talk to the Reserve Bank Governor. I actually do. So I do get the opportunity to, David and I have established meetings with the Reserve Bank. I have had the opportunity to talk to the Reserve Bank Governor, Dr. Philip Lowe, and he certainly made some comments about CAFBA and our ability to have a line of sight from the customer level up to the CEO level of the banks, and to be able to provide the banks and their CEOs with a better insight of what's actually happening within their businesses than they get from the people around them. We deal with APRA and we have interactions with them, Australian Financial Complaints Authority, has a commercial ombudsman, and we deal with AFCA. We provide them with advice and insights. Thankfully, commercial finance is not a big area of business for AFCA. In fact, we're a rounding error. In their reporting, we come under other, which is fantastic. But nonetheless, we liaise with them. And part of that is not what you see, but what you don't see, and the fact that they don't start intruding into the activities and things that we do. And also the Treasury. And now, at the beginning of COVID, Martin Cadena was the head of, the Chief Policy Advisor to Josh Frydenberg, and we actually had interactions, obviously, with the Treasurer. But there were a lot of Sunday morning phone calls with us, Treasury, Anna Bligh of the Bankers Association, some of the other industry bodies around, things like loan deferrals, things like that. We actually have a seat at the table. Any of those sorts of issues we deal with, and we are able to that transcends government. We've been able to move that across to Labor, and I've had already one meeting in the Treasurer's office talking about things that we want in the upcoming budget and things that we've done in the past, and with Stephen Jones, the Assistant Treasurer, specifically about regulation. And one of the things he said to me was that whilst they're looking into buy now, pay later and into some areas of financial planning, he is absolutely happy with the Commercial and Asset Finance Brokers Association and the commercial finance market, and echoed the comments of the Hayne Royal Commission that there doesn't need to be any further change to regulation around our space. That's all good news, but that's because we have these ongoing relationships and conversations with them, and we're able to present to them what it is that we're doing to give them comfort. We also deal with shadow regulators. I mentioned the Australian Bankers Association, or Banking Association. Anna Bligh, the former Queensland Premier, who's the head of the ABA, is phenomenal. She's fantastic, and we have very good conduit of communication. I can text Anna on a Sunday morning, which not a lot of people can do, and we have conversations about things, policies that are happening that perhaps the bank's decision makers are not aware of, that are happening within the operational areas of the banks, and this is around policy and lending and access to finance for business. So we have very good communication there. There's Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman, Bruce Bilson, and prior to Bruce, Kate Carnell. We are members of ASBIFIO and partner with them in terms of providing input and an insight to them and providing solutions to people who come to them. And Bruce Bilson's going to join me on stage at our conference, which is in Melbourne on November 10th, which I'm sure you'll all be signing up for as well, and I hope you do. And CAFBA is a member of the Council of Small Business Organisations of Australia, of which I'm also a board member. COSBOA is an organisation of organisations, so it's like an industry body full of the newsagents, the petroleum distributors, the hairdressers, the pharmacy guild, the CPAs. It's an industry body of industry bodies, and to be involved in that discussion and certainly at a board role gives us a lot of gravitas and certainly gives us a lot of insight into what's going on, and a platform from which larger than our own, from which we can put forward our ideas. I'm going to jump to another area now, professional standards. As I said, one of our overarching things is the professionalisation of the market that we're in. Now, at the moment, we're an industry body, but if we can move ourselves, one of our goals has always been to move to being a professional body, and there's a distinction between an industry body and a professional body. And if you are a professional body, you are a member of a professional standards scheme, and there has to be independently set up and authorised, but it's also legislated so that I'll give you examples here of what a professional standards or what a PSS member would be. It would be the CPAs, the Law Society. There's actually others who are not always not so much in the law or accounting. I'm trying to read it there. The strata managers, architects, people like that. So if we can register ourselves and become a registered professional body, that makes a huge distinction between what it is that we do and who we are and who our members are and other brokers in the market. And that's not to exclude people. Everything we do is to actually include people and to bring them along. But I can tell you one thing, whenever we've been dealing with regulators, whilst we're able to self-regulate at the moment, there only needs to be a regime change at ASIC or somewhere else that says, no, you can no longer do that, you must be a profession. We've got to beat that and actually become a profession. And when regulation and registration and licensing of commercial finance brokers, whenever it's been mooted, it's always been, well, the exclusions will be for the professional bodies, or it'll be managed by the professional bodies. So in essence, we need to be one. Now, the PSS has said to us that we're 3/4 of the way there. It's a process that's actually about CAFBA, not about its members, and the onus is actually on the industry body itself, not on the membership. But we expect to have that process completed within 18 months to 2 years. It's a reasonable cost, but the uplift to our profession and the distinction that we will have as commercial brokers against other brokers will be phenomenal. And you'll never ever have to have that conversation with the clients about justifying who you are, your experience, what you know, all that sort of stuff. If you're a member of a profession, you didn't get there by accident just by paying your fees. It's because it's a credential. I'm going to run through some stuff. We do a lot of market insights. We outsource this to KPMG. There's Mark Boris again, and I quoted him a few times. I was impressed with him this morning. He quoted data as being important and core logic, but the sort of stuff that we gather isn't available through core logic. But Reserve Bank and others want this data, and they want to know what's happening at street level in our market. And the reason they want to know is because whatever happens in the commercial finance market almost happens in real time. If there's a budget, on budget night, if there's a policy that's introduced, our phones either die or ring the next morning accordingly. If there's something like the instant asset write-off which comes along, it has a profound impact on our business. And what we're able to do is to be as a profession or as an industry, be a fabulous barometer far quicker than, say, the quarterly or monthly figures are that are gathered from other sources. I won't go into these sorts of things in detail, but this is the sort of information that we gather. We use it not just in dealing with regulators, but if we're able to talk to regulators, it's okay to just turn up and say, okay, I represent commercial finance brokers. But if you say that you represent $400 billion of receivables and $100 billion a year in brand new business, you're a significant part of the economy. So, that you represent a group of people who have minimum education standards and so forth, they listen to you. And that's something that we've established over many years. Again, the sort of information that we gather, and we distribute this amongst our members. And we've got, apart from the asset finance brokers that we have on the board, we've got some fantastic commercial finance brokers, and Dominic Lacerdo, who I'm sure many of you would know, is the Vice President of CAFBA, and runs a business that writes well in excess of $1 billion a year in commercial business here in Sydney and around the country. And these sorts of insights at board level at CAFBA are shared with others. I won't go through those in detail because they're fairly self-explanatory. We know about our market. We know that in the asset finance space, we write about 80% of all new business. That excludes novated leases and finance leases. But we also know that segment by segment, in the micro market, we're about 95% of all business. Through to the institutional and corporate, we're about sort of 50 or 40%. But it used to be a lot less than that. And these figures have changed over time, and again, are a reflection of the way in which the market has been professionalised. We have a diversity and inclusion committee run by Sharon Peening, and we have 3 female board members, and we have some younger board members as well. We are very much into looking like the people that we serve and that we look after. So, and that's in terms of gender, ethnicity, and so forth. We don't want to be male, pale, and stale, which is an expression that we picked up from the US market, and we were and we're very, very keen. We engage with the US, our equivalent body in the US and in Canada and in the UK, and it's amazing, like globally, all of us are trying to do the same thing, and we share insights from each other in doing that. What's next? Goal to encourage and educate more women, young professionals. This is really important to us, and David might correct me if I have the wrong figure, but I know that we've sponsored more than 50 women in leadership scholarships, which is a $10,000 or $15,000 scholarship, which is the purpose of which is to escalate women from secondary to primary roles in commercial finance. And almost without exception, every single woman who's been female who's been through that course, it's not about finance, it's actually about leadership, has had a career increase. And some of them have gone from being assistants to partners in firms. And there are lots of women in finance, but we want to see equality in terms of the numbers of the leadership roles and not just have women in secondary roles, which is very 1950s. We do practice the 5 principles of inclusive leadership. I won't go through those in great detail. I'm more interested in talking about our professional education program, part of which is a program called PACE, which I'll get to. I mentioned that Terry runs the Education Foundation. Not everyone, we have an education foundation. Now that is financial commitments from all of our founding partners as well as from our strategic partners. We are in the process of, I'll run through the courses that we have. I'll come back to that. Run through the courses that we have. The Education Foundation oversees our Certificate 4 in Financial Services, which is an introduction to commercial and asset finance, our Diploma in Financial Services, our CLFP program, Commercial Leasing and Finance program. That's an international designation and qualification and post-nominal, which is recognised around the world. We are in the process of finalising an Australian version of that, which will be signed off by the creators of it in the US. It's an 8-hour exam. You've got to get it all right, and the syllabus is this thick, but it's the highest credential for commercial asset finance in the world. And if we're going to be the leaders of commercial finance around the world or equal to them, we have to own that credential and that piece of education. I'm going to go back to PACE, which is the Professional Attainment Centre of Education. This is actually an online program which we're about to roll out, or it's a platform we're about to roll out, which will actually gather and maintain all of your information about your educational content, where you can register and record your CPD hours. It will send you reminders of training and all those sorts of things. It will list all of our courses and micro courses and micro credentials. When you renew your CAFBA membership each year, you need to tick off that you've actually done whatever the minimum education standard is. And some of these things are only every 2 years or every few years, and it will actually keep you up to date as to what stage you're up to with each of them. It reports, it'll be an education piece or a resource piece for the education programs that we have, and for incoming members to be able to see what we can potentially offer them. I ran through the courses before. That kind of leads me to the end of that, but I'm more interested in questions and anything that anyone has about that, and if there are any questions from the floor, I'd like to take them.
Questions from the floor?
I can't have comprehensively answered all of your queries.
I'll ask a question to get things going. So David, you've got an education platform, some of the best courses in market in terms of professional standards. How do you go about evolving and competing with the other industry bodies or the other education providers?
Oh, that's a very good question. We have strategic partnerships with education providers like the Institute of Strategic Management, and they have the ability to certify our courses to the ASQA standard. I think that's what you call it. But certainly in terms of, for example, our Certificate 4, that has evolved significantly since we first introduced it, and it was actually originally largely based on a mortgage Certificate 4, but it's now very much a commercial one. And it's not just about, our education is not about product. And again, this is a very important distinction. It's about education and actually and you might have a commerce degree, or you might have come from accounting or somewhere else, or from banking, or from being a dry cleaner. But these courses provide you with the tools and the knowledge and the things that you need to know. So, how do you put these loans together? About discounted cash flows, how to fund an asset from a foreign port in a foreign currency into Australia on a letter of credit and convert it into a chattel mortgage or a hire purchase or a lease agreement once it gets here. Those sorts of things. These are actual skills that you put into place. And I might also say, I was privileged to speak at the ITECA conference. That's the Independent Tertiary Education Council of Australia on the Gold Coast earlier this year. To about 350 delegates, a room larger than this, about CAFBA's education program. Now, these people are educators and they actually run all these sorts of courses. But we were asked to speak because what we had done with education, specific courses designed to assist people in our own businesses and in our own profession to progress our profession so that we could self-regulate. It's what they were all trying to do. Now, we didn't even know that ITECA existed when we started down this course. But so we just sort of did this off our own bat. But, they sort of held us up as the example of how this ought to be done. So that's, I guess that answers your question in a roundabout kind of way. How it evolves in terms of the needs, regulatory change, we update it accordingly. So we make sure that the education and the courses that we provide are relevant to the things that you need to know. And we don't use this to exclude people. I know there's a large movement to encourage resi brokers into the commercial space. We encourage that. But what we encourage is that they go through the pathway first and that they're not, because the right product in the wrong hands provides the wrong outcome. It's no accident that we're able to self-regulate. We're not on a current affair every other night, that we didn't get smashed in the Royal Commission. In fact, we got the tick. You never heard about that. We got the, you've done a great job, nothing to see here. That was in round 3. And none of that is an accident, but we have to maintain those standards. So we encourage people to come into the profession that we're in, but with the appropriate skill set so they can provide the right outcomes for people. And we encourage lenders only to accredit people who have those requisite skills. And I just, before we came here today, David Gill and I were at the NAB Broker Academy, just a block or two from here, where, NAB's running a session training commercial brokers, but and they're doing it with our course content, and saying that we will only accredit you as a commercial broker if you are a CAFBA member. And we're quite happy with that.
Great answer. Are there any other questions for David? We've got one over here. To the right. Yeah. Can you shout?
Yes, I'll try to shout, but I don't think you can hear me. Now, you have a very good question, a very good point in regards to the commercial aspect where everyone needs to be well equipped. Thank you. Okay, they can't hear me. Cool. So you have a very good point where everyone needs to be really well equipped if they want to, deliver the best. But probably that's a question that we need to also ask that in the resi space, I think there are lots of new brokers in the industry for the last 5 years. And would you agree that just for them, new brokers in the industry who don't have experience in banking and finance, if they just do a course, it's not really well equipped for them to be on the market?
I would absolutely agree with that. And this has been one of the things that's driven us right from day one, before we even formed CAFBA from our the state bodies that became CAFBA. This has always been not one of the roles of self-regulation and of an industry body is to include the people who should be included, but to provide a barrier to entry to people who shouldn't be included. And I couldn't agree with you more. And this is one of our overarching principles, is that, we encourage everyone. But typically I can tell you that most people in commercial finance come from a banking or finance background. That's and that is one distinction. And a lot of people in the resi space, and I'm not putting down the resi space, I've got a lot of respect for the way in which it's run, but I know that you don't have to come from a banking background to do home loans. And I know that, when I walk into my local milk bar in Melbourne and the guy's a dry cleaning agent and he's a Tesla agent and he's a mortgage broking agent, I think, oh God, this is why we had a Royal Commission, because anyone could do it. And I applaud all of the regulatory changes that were put around that at the time. The other thing, I was saying this selfishly, every time that someone hits the headlines being a finance broker in that space, it reflects on us. I don't like that either. It's not us, and the regulators, I think, know that. Education at every level and in any
Correct.
part of financial services is important.
Yeah, because I think in the commercial space there's lots of support, so CAFBA is really good. But I think in regards to the resi space, the way we look at it, I do understand it's an open industry, but I think like you say, education is key, but it's not just having a certificate that will be able to practice. But I think this is apparent, but I think if everybody, pulls together so that we can provide support in the resi space as well, lobby for it, I think that would be great.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Any other questions for David?
So Eddie's at the back there, and he will take your membership application or any other query that you have. And David and I and Terry and George are here down the front, and it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much.